substantive matter from the first speaker, Team Government.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, we think that the Western society has been built on certain values, values such as equality and democracy. We think that each of us has to go through schooling. And we think that if schooling doesn't provide those values, we think that schooling is very wrong. What we see is that especially the private schools are the ones that promote different values, the values that go against basic principles on which we think our society should stand. This is why we think we are going to ban all private schools. We are going to make no exceptions, except things like afternoon programs for like cooking, which we think are not very connected with education itself. So we are going to every school is going to be now state school. We think that they're going to focus even more. We are going to make them focus even more on providing democratic values and other values that we think everybody is promoting. They're going to try to promote peace and unity within society. So we think that we are also going to impose bigger taxes on rich people to pay even more money for the schools. We think we have no problem with them losing bits of cash. So what is our case today? Number one, I'm going to tell you how this is the only way that it provides equal opportunities. Number two, I'm going to tell you how there is no unity if we don't have these schools. And thirdly, our second speaker is going to have an analysis, economic analysis, how this is going to be better for everyone. No, thank you. Our first argument, how this is the only way it goes with equal opportunities. We think that it is fundamentally unfair that some people go to schools that have much better kind of teaching. These are schools that have much better facilities and have millions of money to do whatever they can. We say that there's fundamental difference in the quality of the education that they can provide, and we think this is bad. Because we think that's no, thank you. Everybody was born equal. But we think that the ones we go to schools that are fundamentally different, this doesn't happen anymore. We think that this means that poor people have less chances in their life of success, and we think this is bad. This creates second-class citizens. We ask you why this is a good thing. Answer me.
So basically you're arguing that we should just simply improve the public system. Please say why that wouldn't also solve the problem that you're outlining now.
Well, we think that those private schools are inherently connected with certain kind of ideas, which I'm going to explain otherwise, and I'm going to refer to them. So we say that actually it creates very big differences in the very beginning. We think that the role of the state is to actually to say no, this will not happen. We think that the state has to do that. And what are the actual consequences of these equal opportunities? We think that in status quo there's a lot of very rich people, but we think that we don't have a very big problem if some people have more money with others. But we think that they came to money on the wrong way. Because we think that the modern capitalism is just an extension of feudalism. We think that the rich people have money just because they inherited, but not only because they inherited, but because their kids had much bigger chances of going to good schools and getting better education. We think that there has never been a redistribution of money since feudalism, precisely because the rich people sent their kids to schools and poor people couldn't. We think because of this happened, there is no redistribution of money. So we see that rich people send their kids to schools like Phillips Exeter Academy or Andover Academy in the United States, or St. Paul's or Eton School in England. And it also continues to university. They're getting much better education, and we think this is very bad because we stand for meritocracy, and we think that this actually goes against meritocracy because not everybody has same chances in the beginning to succeed. Because when somebody gets much higher chances of actually getting good education, he's also going to have much bigger chances of success on the market. We think that this promotes that there's actually never going to be a redistribution of money, and we think that this is bad because there will be no equal chances. And we think that there's principally bad and unfair that poor people won't be able to do that. But we think it's also bad on practical level, because that means that poor people are not going to be able to succeed. What are the practical things of that? We think that there are going to be less innovations because we think there's a lot of talent within those schools for poor people. But we say that there's a lot of greater good that those poor people can do if they get a proper education.
Sir?
Go.
Does your bill not teach the lowest common denominator times within society and thus reducing innovation?
No, because we say that we are going to put much more money in school, because we said in our plan that we have no problem with taxing rich people. We think that our oral quality is going to be better. It's going to bring, as we say in our second argument, unity. Why is there no unity in current system? We say that like those private schools have certain agenda behind them. We say that many of them are religious schools that many times teach like extremist idea. We say that those schools are very often like elite schools that promote snobism and are based on some kind of very conservative ideals. We say that many of those schools are single-sex schools, and we say that like those people, no thank you, those people don't learn the interaction with other sex. We think that, and here it comes to your first POI, that there's like inherently, those schools are inherently have this agenda, because we say that like if they wouldn't be able to do these things, they wouldn't exist, because they wouldn't have reason to exist. We say that like because they have this freedom to do it, that is why they exist, because if they didn't have freedom, there would be no point of them existing. We say that what are the practical consequences when we put all those people in normal schools and teach them democratic values. We say that the society is going to be less fragmented, and this is one of the problems. We say that like there's going to be more teaching of democratic values. No, thank you. Because we say that like once we put those people in schools and teach them with like, we think that there can be like education that actually teaches them what is democracy and how to make it better. We say that there's going to be much more respect, because once we put those young kids that are like rich and poor since the age of 6, we say that they're going to become friends. And when these young kids become friends, we say that there's going to be less difference with them, and they're going to respect each other. But we also say that we come to other benefits. We say that there's going to be much more productivity within society, because if people from all backgrounds cooperate together, there's going to be some kind of new friendships, and those people are going to form certain values together. And lastly, we say that this is good because it brings much easier to consensus-based democracy. Because now we say that we are teaching all a range of different ideas. We say that there's like creationism in school and different ideas. We say that once we put all those people together and teach them some common values, and the school acts as common socializing tool, that they're going to be like less extremist. We say that we like create unified society within which consensus-based democracy can function better. We say that within consensus-based democracy, the decisions are going to be better made, and decisions are going to be, the people are going to agree on them. So what we have told you today? First, we said there can be no equal opportunities if we start with kids of different like sexes, different classes in school differently. But secondly, we said that like there's going to be no unity, which we think is also important, because we think that our plan is the one and the only one that promotes democratic values and equality. We beg you to propose.
Speaker. We now call for the first speaker of team opposition to deliver a first substantive and rebuttal.
Thank you. We just heard from a side proposition who proposes that we eliminate like the discrepancy between classes by proposing a tax on all of society. We've heard about how we want to create equality between people who go to private schools, between people who go to public schools, between people who are more wealthy and less wealthy. We don't think that by imposing a tax upon society is going to do this. We don't think that by making people pay more for an education where we're not even convinced that resources are going to be reallocated into the public system is how we're going to eliminate any like wealth discrepancy that we have in our society. And it's on that basis that we oppose this bill. So what in my speech today, I'd first like to get into some refutation about what we heard from side opposition. And then I'd like to go into our first constructive points on our side today. So what did we hear from side opposition today? Well, the first thing we heard was their model. And what we heard in their model is that they're not going to be making any exceptions other than things that aren't actually done with like academics. And we heard that they're going to impose more taxes, and we have many issues with their model today. First of all, we want to ask you the question about what alternatives people are going to turn to. People go to a private school because they feel as though it has something more to offer them than a public school does. We think that when we take away this option, it's not going to suddenly change that these needs are not being fulfilled in the public school for them. We think that they're going to turn to like alternative measures, such as like homeschooling, right? We don't think that people are suddenly going to be forced to go into like the public system. We think that like people are going to have to turn to other means of education. Then when we say to like imposing more taxes, we think that number one, that's not going to eliminate like wealth discrepancy, right? By imposing more taxes, they're going to need to prove that that's justifiable by eliminating the private sector and therefore improving education. But furthermore, we haven't heard a definition of this house. This applies to the country overall. We need to look at countries where they don't have a solid governmental education system in place. What's going to happen in countries where people can't afford to pay taxes, where countries or the government isn't like being responsible with the education system? It's in these countries that we need to allow private education so that people are still able to prosper despite the fact that their government isn't offering these services. No, thank you. So after we heard about their model, we heard their first constructive point, that about better opportunities. And what we heard in this is that basically just poor people have less opportunity, people who go to public school have less opportunity. So we think that this underlies on like three main problems. Number one, this is the assertion that only rich people can go to private school. We think that of course like there might be like more people who are more wealthy at a private school, but we think that you can still go there like on a scholarship, right? We think that it's not necessarily like that you're more wealthy, so you therefore go to a private school. But we also think that you can still have good marks in a public school. You can still get a good education in a public school. They offer programs such as AP or such as IB to people in public schools who need to like excel beyond the curriculum. So we think that that's addressed within the public system as well. Then finally, we think that discrepancy between like education between wealthy people and like less wealthy people will still exist, because you can more wealthy people can hire tutors, right? They can enter programs. They're still going to have more opportunities even if they're not going into the private sector. So we don't think that that's going to be eliminated. Then we heard their second constructive point, that about less unity, and we heard about how private institutions promotes being snobby and how they don't promote democratic values. But first of all, we think that's a huge assertion. We need to hear some analysis as to how they promote people being snobby. We don't think that that's necessarily the case. We think there's certainly a lot of bullying, there's certainly a lot of problems going on in public school, and in fact that's why a lot of people switch into private school. But even if it does, we think that there's also going to be problems within other stuff, right? We think that other things in society promote people being snobby or being elitism, such as wearing brand name clothing. We don't think that the government can necessarily stop us from wearing brand name clothing because it promotes elitism, right? So we need to think on that basis, is it really justifiable to do this? Right. Then we heard about democratic values one moment, and we think that that's an assertion. Why won't private schools teach democratic values? Why would this be different in the public sector? We think that also parents teach values as well. We don't think that's necessarily something that needs to happen through the education system, and we'd like to hear this dealt with on-site proposition.
You're finding irrelevant problems. You said there's a problem with clothing, but you say we can have school uniforms. Why couldn't we have that?
Okay, so now we're going to institute uniforms into a public school. We don't think that's what we need to do. That was just an example. What I'm trying to tell you is that there's always going to be elitism in society. There's always going to be social class. There's always going to be classes. Whether or not we have brand name clothing or not, whether or not we have private education or not, we're just asking them to differentiate between public school and private school and other things that promote this. So now that I've dealt with the case that we heard from them, I'd like to get into our case, on-site opposition. But first I want to outline the burdens that we're going to be proving throughout our case. We think that the burdens on-site opposition today are that we need to prove to you the choice of education doesn't hinder the quality of education. And we need to show you that the government shouldn't have absolute control over the education system. And we think that what side proposition needs to prove to you today, which we don't think that they even begun to do in their first speech, is that the government has the right to control everybody's education. That removing private schools would increase the quality of public education, and that the redistribution of wealth through taxes in this circumstance is justifiable. So we bring to you 3 points today: that of choice, that of the benefits of a two-tiered system, and that of the harms of the government controlling the education system. And we bring this to you under the case line: both public schools and schools that are paid help everybody get a passing grade. So now I'd like to get into my point about choice. First, I'm going to be introducing this point with 4 subpoints, and the first being the importance of freedom of choice. So we have freedom of choice. This is a right that we recognize, and it's a basic human freedom, right? But why do we have it? We think that individuals are better at assessing their own needs compared to the government, and we think that that's why the right exists. So then I want to look at the second idea, application to education. Why does freedom of choice apply to the education system? We think that parents and children are more capable of deciding what's best for education. We think that parents should have the right to prioritize their education. If they want to spend these resources into helping their children into the future, we think that this is the right they should have to do, and we don't think that it's the government's right to step out of it in this situation. So then into the third idea, that of ability of parents. Why are parents best, Mr. Speaker? We think that parents always has that incentive to do what's right for their kids. We think that parents know specifically what a child can do, and therefore they know what kind of future they have, and that's not something the government has. Yes?
Don't you think that state has already showed that it has a lot of knowledge about education? Many times we see that parents don't.
Okay, thank you. But we think that parents know their child on an individual basis, and that's something that the government doesn't have. It's this individual relationship that benefits the child in this sense. So finally, does the government have a right to regulate it? If families can choose, why is it the government's right to say no? We don't think that the government can assess the kids better than the parents, and we don't think that because this privatized education is doing any harm to anything else, it's the government's right to regulate it. So let's look quickly into the second point, that of benefits to a two-tier system. We think that the benefit of a two-tier system is that it alleviates pressure on the public system. It would alleviate pressure because there'd be fewer children, and therefore there'd be more resources to go around. What does this look like? It means that there'd be more computers, or it means that there'd be more computers, more books, more attention from teachers, right, when we don't have this strain. So we think that when we put the strain on the public education system, when we eliminate these resources, overall, it lowers education. We think that it lowers education for everybody. Both people in the public people in the public sector are strained, and people in the private sector are put into a strained public sector that isn't necessarily tailored to their individual needs. We think also that the private sector is of higher quality oftentimes. They have more incentive because they make a profit on this, and this isn't something that the government has. Moreover, they're able to adopt because the private sector, the private sector can adapt to things that they need because they're not bound by government rule. We think that private schools can adopt programs more easily, like AP or IB, because they aren't bound by the government. So what I've told you today, Mr. Speaker, is that we beg to oppose today on the basis that both public schools and schools that are paid help everybody get a passing grade. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Awesome. We now call for the second speaker of the proposition to deliver his substantive rebuttal and refutation.
Thank you very much. So, what am I going to do today? First of all, I will answer all the points, all the questions raised by today's opposition, and answer all the misconceptions they have presented. And after that, I will present the argument about the economic effects of our policy. So the first thing side opposition today does not understand is the mutual exclusiveness between private schools and good public schools. Private schools are in a market system a lot more competitive, which means they get the better teachers, which means they get the better stuff, they get the better things. And we don't want private schools to have the better things. We want everybody to have an opportunity to have the better thing. That is the first reason why there is a mutual exclusiveness between equality and private schools. The second reason why there is an inequality between private schools and there is mutual exclusiveness between private schools and equality is that private schools take up a lot of money which is unneeded. Private schools, no thank you, use up a lot of their money and resources to be competitive on the market. They use a lot of resources just to be, no thank you, just for the image of the school. No thank you. And we think that all of these resources with an adequate taxation would actually be relocated to education itself and not to making a school look cooler. So these are the, no thank you, these are the two reasons why we think that our plan is mutually, their proposition is mutually exclusive with equality. Now, moving on to the next point, where will these people go, right? They're assuming that, because we will discontinue private schools, everybody that is that was on a private school, we take up homeschooling and so on. The first thing we have to say here is that homeschooling and private tutorship is bad by our definition. Secondly, no thank you. Secondly, what we're saying here is that, no thank you, we have countless examples of countries in which there is a public education and almost no private sector, and in fact the people, no thank you, even the wealthy people, for example Slovenia, for example Sweden, actually go to public schools. So their analysis on this point is extremely invalid. Moving on, the next idea was, what about poor countries, where we basically somehow need private schools because we can't supply public schools with money. But what we're trying to say is here, that is the exact point. We don't want to have only private schools, we want to take the money that is invested in private schools and put it into public schools. And if we take all the money that is, no thank you, invested into private schools in these poor countries, we will have a better public and more equality. Yes?
Where do you necessarily get that money from when you're only taking marginally more taxes?
I don't know if you realize how much money is put into private schools in poorer countries and how little money would be necessary to vastly improve public schools in these countries. So your assertion is incorrect at this point as well. Then there's the point of scholarship. And what side proposition today is actually saying is, yes, give scholarship to everybody. What we're trying to say is, public schools are basically a scholarship to everybody. What they would be doing is, okay, giving money to the people and let the people pay these private schools, which is basically a vastly bigger, more complex and expensive system of doing it. And is therefore, again, an invalid point made by side proposition today. Then there was this example, no thank you, of brand clothing. And we think that this point here is correct. We don't agree with the fact that the brand clothing is more valued in our society. However, we think that clothing is not of big of an impact, does not have a big enough impact on the society for the state to have a right to intervene. We don't agree with branded clothing being a better thing in our society, but we don't care as much for clothing that we have to intervene. Education, on the other hand, is important, and the state has to intervene.
Sir.
No, thank you. Then they presented us with the benefits of a two-tier system. And again, here, if we don't have a two-tier system, we will have more resources, and they can be allocated to the private schools, making public schools, I'm sorry, no thank you, making public schools better.
Sir?
No thank you. So moving on, this was basically the refutation. This was answering all the points they have raised about how private schools are somehow superior and should be there. We have shown you that they are mutually exclusive with an equal society. We have shown you that their existence limits poor people in education, and we think that is, first of all, unequal, as presented by our first speaker, and second of all, no thank you, will harm our economy. How will it harm our economy? It will harm our economy on three points. First of all, as we know, education is directly proportional with your welfare. Educated people are generally richer and more prosperous. And we think that giving public schools, giving everybody a better education will actually, no thank you, lessen the difference between rich and poor people in the country. It will lessen the difference. It will create, no thank you, it will create a stronger middle class, which is basically which is a requirement for a good capitalist economy. So, first of all, it will lessen the difference between rich and poor people in our countries, which is, again, good for our economy. And no, thank you. The second point is that we think that because we will give more people the chance to be educated, more people will basically take up this chance and we will have a more educated society. Let me give you an example. In the United Kingdom, at the age from 20 to 25, there is a percent of approximately 20 people who actually go to university and are getting an education. In, for example, Slovenia, which has a completely public education, we have almost 50% of people who go to university and get an education. So we see it's more than a double-fold more than double the people go to university and get a better education, no thank you, in Slovenia than in the United Kingdom. And we think that this is a very important thing for our economy, because the future of the world economy is not in mining coal, it is in high-tech stuff, it is in education, it is in college graduates. And we can actually see a similar thing here. Slovenia has come, because of this public system, because of what we're doing with our education, from a socialist country to a very successful capitalist country with a bigger economical growth than the United Kingdom itself. And so this is the second point why such an education will actually benefit and not will benefit our economy. And the last point we have here is basically knowledge, and the talent for knowledge is, from our perspective, a resource from a country. The same way as some countries have like a large pool of oil underneath them, we think that every country has basically a resource of people who could be talented scientists and very well educated people. And what our side is trying to do is we're trying to pump all the oil. We're trying to get everybody who could be a good graduate, who could benefit our society, we're trying to get every one of them into university and get them educated. What side opposition today is doing is basically only taking half the oil. They don't care about half the oil because part of the oil can't pay for the pumping. And this, we think that this is an elementary bad standpoint. We think that every country, whatever country it is, should try to get all the resources it has, all the renewable resources, because knowledge of people is actually a renewable resource. So we're not only proposing a better economy, we're proposing a greener economy. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, we would now call for the second speaker in opposition to deliver his substantive rebuttal.
Side proposition school of thought makes opposition quite distraught. And we think this begins from, firstly, they're having this issue with public education, saying that there's a need that needs to be filled, that this education is not substantive enough to, use all these children oil resources that they spent the last minute talking about. So we would say that it is quite scary that they would then make that system that is failing the only alternative for someone to have, the only system for anyone to be able to use. Then they brought for you this solution of tax redistribution, which we haven't really heard substantive points that are really burden been fulfilled by side proposition to say that the taxes should be more taxes should be given to the richer members of society. They had an unclear bill in which they didn't even tell you, okay, well, taxes are raised, or is this tax money even going to get redistributed into the education system? And they really haven't told you why this plan of tax redistribution could not just go along with private education still existing. Both of these plans could easily take place. Lovely.
Well, but how then, if this tax system does not work, how does Sweden, how does Slovenia, how does, I believe, the Czech Republic have such a system if it is impossible to do?
It's not impossible to do. You can raise taxes. You can also keep a private education system in point. You haven't presented this sort of like opt-out system, which maybe you would have wanted to do, saying like, if you go into private education, you opt out of this tax redistribution, so then there's like less income to the public schools, then this is a problem. But either way, if you had private and public education available, you would still be getting the tax revenue from like parents of students that went to private school. I'm going on for too long. I'm telling you what you should have done, but either way, we'd say that the plan that you've proposed doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, doesn't actually justify the bill that we're debating about, which is not tax redistribution. It's about eliminating private school. We've told you there's substantive problems with that. What are those? How have we laid them out? First of all, we talked to you about choice. We don't think this is a point that's really been engaged with on a principled level. We've told you that there's a better alternative available, that parents should be able to have the choice as to which sort of education they want their children to have. We don't think that that's something that should be reserved to just what's in the government curriculum, that there should be more opportunities available for a child. This hasn't been engaged with on a principled level. We don't see why parents should not be able to have this choice. They've just told you that it's great for equal opportunity and it's great for our public education system to be funded better. That's fine. Second idea, we told you about the benefits of a two-tiered system. We told you that alleviates pressure on the public school system. We told you that there's more attention, more resources that are available to private education, that it is a beneficial avenue to have in place. What they told you is that they didn't tell you a whole lot. They didn't reply to you about the idea of alleviation of pressure on this public school system. They said that funds would do what needs to be done. We'd say if we didn't put this bill in place, that there wouldn't be need for those extra funds, that we would have the status quo working in the way that it does now, where you have the opportunity to choose which system you want to put your child in. Yes?
You're talking about some kind of choice that parents have. But you say it's like 95% of parents have no choice at all because they have no money.
95% is, first of all, very, very high, very hyperbolic, because I'd say that 95% of kids don't go to public school. So that's a problem with that little statistic that I was given right there. But we'd say that there is much more choice than that. Here's actually where I'm going into rebuttal of the arguments that we've heard from side proposition so far. Firstly, they talk to you about equal opportunity. That's where this POI becomes relevant, because they told you that these parents will not be able to pay for this education. We'd say that parents are able to prioritize education so that you can make sacrifices to give your child a better education, to put them in a private school. They told you about mutual exclusivity when they were defending this point. We'd say that none of this is exactly true. What we would say is that private schools, like the big ones in the US that they provided as examples, actually have huge scholarships that they give out, so that kids that come from a lower socioeconomic background, if they deserve it academically, can go to these schools. We will say that academic achievement will always vary, that if, I guess, not all this oil that you're finding in this pool comes equally, comes as an equal quality. It's a very interesting metaphor. I'm just going to keep bringing it up over and over again.
Sure.
They told you that we can fix the lowest common denominator by just throwing money at the education system, giving it better resources. We tell you that there are always going to be children that struggle, that's going to drag the rest of this, that's going to drag the better academic students back. My point actually goes into that, if I can ever really get there. Then, the second point that they brought forward to you, the idea of unity. We told you that not all private schools have some sort of anti-establishment message that they're trying to give out there. We told you that not every private school is this snobby institution, and we haven't actually had that point substantially defended. They didn't tell you why democratic principles could not be taught by private schools, could not be taught by someone's parents, why that had to come from the public school system. We didn't see a proper defense of this point. We think it's still falling. Then, they brought up this point of economics. They told you that Slovenia is now a capitalist country, that Slovenia has this brilliant system. We'd say that you're advocating for a capitalist sort of situation, but then you're getting rid of basic capitalist ideals like supply and demand, like a competitive education system where all these businesses, these schools that are businesses, are trying to outperform each other, trying to provide a better level of education, trying to look better in the eyes of universities. We'd say that that's how you get competitiveness, that's how you get the best education. We'd say, okay, oil is a resource, kids are oil, education is great, that's the only point you're making. We don't think you provided any sort of basis for this. Your plan doesn't help. Now, onto my point finally, the control on education. No thanks, I've taken two. We think this breaks down two ways. Firstly, the idea of the lowest common denominator. Secondly, the government control on curriculum. We think these are both huge problems. So lowest common denominator. We'd say that the government, when providing an education system, has a responsibility that private institutions do not. We think that is the idea of no child left behind, that every student has to be able to meet this certain guideline, has to meet this curriculum, and that's really the only expectation that the government puts on their education system. We'd say that this means that when a child has has problems understanding basic math, that the school is going to have to, or the teacher is going to have to slow down that lesson. That means that everyone who's already understood it still has to be learning at that level. We think that's not something that exists in private education. When you have students that greatly struggle academically, we think what occurs here is that they just can no longer go to the school, that these schools often have higher expectations for their students. We'd say what happens in public education is that students are taught to a standardized test, taught to pass a standardized test. What that essentially means is that a school or a teacher will never go beyond the call of duty because they don't have that expectation, and frankly, they're not able to do it. We think in private schools you can set that bar wherever you want it, and we think that that's often going to be set high because that's what's going to end up in the best results. Schools want to build their prestige, they're going to make the bar set high. We think that the alternative to this provides a better tailored education. We don't think every public school can expect their students to learn, say, 5 different languages, but we think that if you, as a parent, expect your child to do that, then we can put you in a school where you're expected to do that. We think that these schools allow you, because of their prestige, to actually end up in a better university. Then, the government control on curriculum. We'd say in Russia, what was trying to go on is that they're trying to build up Stalin again in history, that they're trying to really change the perspective. We'd say that there's a lack of international perspective when you're able to change your entire curriculum. We think that when you go to a private school, you have an opportunity to get an international perspective that you wouldn't already have. That's why there's a demand for systems like IB. That's why we think that these curriculums, spreading a government-mandated idea, is not always a positive thing. Because public schools and schools are paid, help everyone get a passing grade, we think this bill must fall. Thanks.
Okay, for the last constructive speech on side proposition, we call the government.
So today in this debate we have like a side proposition which has actually provided good examples on why our system of public education and solely public education will work, and then we have side opposition that lives off examples and assumptions that they never really proved. I shall explain why this debate goes to our side on 3 points. The first point, which I think is really important in today's debate, is why exactly are private and public schools incompatible with one another. The point that I think side opposition has missed today is that private schools only work if they are better than public schools. Private schools work on the basis that you have to pay something to get to a school, whereas public schools are free. You will only pay this money for a private school if the private school will be better than a public school. How will the private school become better than a public school? By getting better teachers and by getting more equipment that facilitates the quality of education. And it will do so by taking the teachers away from public schools, by offering them much more money, and thus bringing them to private schools, whereas the public schools will remain with much more low-quality teachers and much more low-quality equipment. So what happens if, for example, the state decides that, okay, this is a bad system, and we should increase the quality of public schools, as side opposition has suggested as the solution to today's problem? Actually, not much will happen. Even if the state will pay more money to its own public school teachers, then the result of this will be that private schools, in order to still be able to attract people, will A, charge even more money from their own students, thus making it even harder for poor people and people from lower classes to enter these public schools, and then the private schools will use this money to once again steal the teachers from public schools to get more equipment than public schools have, and the end is a kind of war of attrition between public and private schools. In the end, both of these spend huge amounts of money on teachers and equipment and so forth, and in the end, private schools necessarily have to win, or else they would lose their right to existence, because nobody would send kids to them anymore, and the result of this is that not only does a lot of money go from the state, which is unnecessary, but also a lot of money goes from the parents of children in private schools, thus make it even harder for lower classes to enter these public schools. We have talked today about taxation and why the taxation system works or will not work. And we think that the justification of the taxation system that we have proposed is quite simple, because in virtually every country in the world, the state has the right to tax its people when it believes that the results of these taxes will bring better quality of life for the entirety of society in the long run. And we believe that we have shown this through our examples. Now, to go to the second point, which talks about inequality. Firstly, why will inequality arise through the concept of private schools? Because, quite simply, because only rich people, and perhaps a couple of those people with scholarships, but we can't have too many scholarships, or once again, because once again, private schools won't have enough money anymore, so they have to majoritively accept people who actually pay for their schooling instead of giving away scholarships. What will happen is that people will only come from one social group in this private school, and thus they will only get to learn this social group. They will only get to understand social group. They'll have very little concern for what happens to the social groups that they don't interact with on a day-to-day basis. And as a result of this, they will be worse off citizens. They will perform less well in democracy, because the principle of Western democracy is that one is able to understand what happens to other people around him instead of just caring for himself. We talked about poor countries and why our plan is supposed to fail most in poor countries. But in fact, our plan will actually work best in poor countries, because poor countries are the ones where there is usually, due to this private schooling system, a huge gap between the people who get good private school education and take up high-ranking positions in society, and the people who have virtually non-existent public school education, and thus as a result are non-educated and take up the lowest class in society. And so this social instability is very huge, and unrest is much more common, leading up even to revolution in the worst cases, because of all this huge social inequality. And so we think that if we have to take some money from taxes in order to decrease the amount of social unrest, then this will be a very good plan indeed.
Sir?
We talked about elitism, just a second, madam. We talked about elitism, and side opposition said that, okay, because we can't get rid of elitism completely, we should not try to get rid of it at all. But we think that this is a silly assumption, and we should do as much as possible to make society as equal functioning as possible. Go, ma'am.
Do you support universal health care?
Yes, what's the problem with that? Seriously. Okay. Then we talked about parents, and we talked about the parents' rights to have, and we talked about the parents' supposed rights to only care about their own children and not do anything for the children of others. But we think that this is exactly where the state has to intervene, because parents will only give money, because parents are so inclined to the idea that their children will do so much better off than other people's children. The state has to step in here and to give everyone's children equal opportunities, also the children of those people that do not have so much money. And finally, at this point, I'd mention their point about Russian schools, teaching kids about Stalin, about the good things of communism, and so forth. And we think that exactly this is the problem. If it is possible already, if we have one school system for problems to arise when it comes to teaching people the things they actually need, what happens when we have 100 different school systems, hundreds of private schools being led each by their own directors, by their own boards, by their own values? We have schools that teach people creationism, that teach people radical Islamic values, as is taking place in let's say, Great Great Britain at present, when there are Arab schools that teach people values from the Quran, even if they directly contradict universal human rights. And we think that this is another problem that we have with private schools that today's proposition is fixing. And then, finally, there's this point about economic gain, which they have not really been able to answer. And this is exactly the point where we have provided the best examples. We have talked about how the fact that all people have the same quality of education, and this not being possible by private schools, why this leads to a society where people are as educated as possible, where the brightest people are the most educated, and thus also the fact that they are most educated leads to them being the most prosperous in economic markets, by being the most innovative, by creating the best inventions and so forth. And this really boosts up the state's economy. So at the end of the day, when we're talking about justification for taxes, we say that if a state takes some money from people in order to bring them this money back in terms of hugely increased GDP as a result of better industries implemented by the state, then we think that this is completely justified. And we think that when they have talked about capitalism, they have missed the point of capitalism. It's also about competition, but firstly it's about equal opportunity and meritocracy. America succeeded as long as it was meritocratic, and as long as it gave everyone equal opportunities in life. And as long as it has stopped doing this, it has become overrun by much better functioning countries like Sweden. Thank you.
Ending the constructive speeches for this match, we call the third opposition speaker.
The third speaker answered my POI by saying that side proposition supports universal health care. What we assume from this is that they do not support a two-tiered system. Ladies and gentlemen, only 2 countries in the entire world have a two-tier system. Ironically, Canada and have a, universal healthcare system. Ironically, Canada is one of them, and North Korea. What we recognize is that every single country they've used today, every single country almost around the world, all fundamentally believe that two-tier systems can work. The arguments we heard from side proposition today were all arguments that said that two-tier systems can't. What we believe now side proposition has to do is prove that fundamentally two-tier systems can never work together. That we cannot have a public and a private sector come together as one to serve a better service for all, because that is the burden they took on with that answer. So now you have to side with Canada and North Korea in the world. Good luck. What we have now are the 3 main themes of today's debate in Clash. I'm going to be talking to you about the 3 of them, which is first. No thanks, boys. No thanks. Sit down. Our first theme of Clash is what's going to produce the best quality of education. Our second one is what are the societal effects. And finally, is this principally just? So let's get into the first one. Best quality of education. Side proposition asserted that because we shut down private schools, that more money will be put into public schools, and therefore, for some reason, they will get better. First off, we'd like to say that this does not logically work. They told you that because private schools shut down, the money that private schools spend in getting a better name and looking good will now all of a sudden go to the public sector. That is not the tax dollars they are talking about. That money is private institution money. We think that money is simply going to disappear for the future of children. Then they told you in their bill that taxation would solve this problem. First off, they never said in their model that the money that was caused or the tax raises would actually go directly to education. They just sort of hoped we would read their mind and assume that's what would happen. No thank you. So let's pretend that it does. What Oliver told you in his speech just before we heard from side proposition, what was never replied to, is why can we not, if we thought increasing taxes was a good idea, do both? Why can you not increase taxes and have private schools? They never told you or gave you a good answer besides the fact that they're mutually exclusive. What they told you is they're mutually exclusive. No thank you. They told you they're mutually exclusive because teachers will always go to the private sector, because all the resources will always go to the private sector. So this is logically saying that whenever you have a two-tier system, all resources will always go to the private sector. This is the analysis from side proposition today. What we tell you inside opposition is that this simply isn't true. What we recognize is that many countries can have admirable public sector education while they have private sector education. If you look to countries, especially Western countries like, Canada or the United States, we see that they do have like comparable education societies. We also like to beg the question between healthcare, right? Why do we think that we can have public healthcare systems and private healthcare systems at the same time? Because we recognize that there are enough teachers to go around and that we can actually put in regulations to prevent the public sector becoming stripped from resources. No, thank you. What we brought up in our constructive case was that the private sector is often better at things. We told you that the private sector is better at things because competition drives them to raise their standards and that they're more adaptable, and that we don't have a problem with that because we think certain children need more rigorous education and certain children do not. We recognize that all children in our education society have different needs and different demands, and we think it's actually better that the private education system can tailor to them. We didn't hear a reply. Perhaps this POI will do it.
Well, are you proposing that the two-tier system is better? Let's look at America. Is the public schooling in America equal? Do people that can't afford private schools in America have an equal chance of education as people who don't?
Well, we think that that obviously depends on the state. What we recognize is that state laws for education vary between state to state. We recognize that there are states who are successful at doing that within America. We see that even in other countries, there are individuals and governments who put in regulations to protect their public sector, to ensure that countries and teachers and resources go there. We recognize that if you're saying these taxation dollars are going to be the sole thing fixing our public sector, then why could you not get those taxation dollars while allowing private? They've never answered that. They're skirting the question, and unless the reply does, we really don't think they can win that argument. We told you that we're going to be alleviating pressure on the public system. They never replied to that besides saying that teachers will go to private, so I guess they would agree that the public system will become more strained when we actually pass this bill, actually furthering reducing the quality of education. Oliver talked to you about how they're teaching to the lowest common denominator. We never heard a reply to what about the child who takes, let's say, 6 classes to learn a math lesson versus the children who take 3. We think that harms the children who take 3 classes to learn a concept and the child who takes 6 classes to learn a concept. They never replied to that idea that we're actually worsening quality of education for everyone and that it's better if we have a private sector that can fill certain niches. No, thank you. We brought you the example of Stalin and about how when a government has total control, the issues there. The reply we got from side proposition was exactly, one system's flawed, so if we have more systems, more will be flawed. The idea behind that analysis is when we give one governing body complete control over education, then they are the only ones who have a say in what the youth are learning. They get to write history, they get to write what math skills their children have, and they get to dictate how literate their population is. We think that this isn't a power we can give to all states. Please tell me why it is.
But we think that it is still a better thing to let the government, the democratic elected, the people decide than the profit, the people that are only interested in getting money from, say, the Islamic community.
Thank you. What we see is that under your model, you didn't define this in liberal democracies. We see that this would take place in countries that aren't necessarily democracies. We see that this would take place in countries that have vested interest in protecting the government. If you wanted the debate to take place in democracies, you should have said so. It's a bit too late for that. Let's move on to the second theme, which is that of societal effects. It's quite brief because it was rather meager. What we heard from side proposition was that innovation would be increased. What we told you in Oliver and my argument is that you're teaching to the lowest common denomination. You're preventing a better quality of being provided to society. That means that you're preventing some of the brightest minds from getting the best education they can. That is when innovation is lowered. That is when we see less like mass innovation from society. They brought you this idea about societal cohesion. They told you that you will be exposed to people of different economic backgrounds, so you'll make friends with them and we'll all get along. First off, we'd like to say that in the status quo, there is exposure between wealthy people and wealthy children and children who don't have as much. That is what happens when you have children who are on scholarships. What we recognize is that those children already interact. But 2, they simply asserted that they would become friends. What we think on-side opposition is that cohesion actually gets worse sometimes. We think that if you're putting very wealthy children in the public sector with children who aren't necessarily, say, as wealthy, there's no reason why they would become friends. They simply asserted that this societal cohesion would happen. We'd say often more division happens when you try and force this upon people. No, thank you. They brought you the ideas about promoting national concepts. Oliver dealt with that effectively. I can't deal with it now, so check your flow. No, thank you. Their third argument was all about the economy. They said we will have better education, thus a better economy. That relies on the first premise that the actual education quality will be going up. I've already proved to you why it won't. Therefore, their entire third argument falls on that because it rested on the first. Now, this last idea of principally just, and we've dealt with it quite extensively down the bench. Their only line of argumentation is that it's not fair because rich people get better quality and that their bill is essentially scholarships for all. What we say in society is that this isn't always true. We recognize that the depiction of private schools onside government is not the one that is the case of the majority. We recognize that while some private schools might cost $50,000 a year, some might also cost $5. Some might also cost $10. And we think that those are things that a lot of families either choose to prioritize for their children to give them a better future. We think they have that right to make the freedom of choice. They never told you why. They said 95% of people don't have that choice. We told you that's not true. Even if it was true, we think that 5% should have the choice to provide the best for their children. Moreover, what we say is that we don't want scholarships for everyone if the scholarships for everyone are going to come at the cost of quality education. We don't want scholarships given to our society if it's actually not going to help them. What we believe is that this bill is a race to the bottom. You aren't helping the private and you aren't helping the public. What we see as side proposition, while admirably tries to benefit the children, is harming them. And it's because we believe that both public schools and schools that are paid helps everyone get a passing grade that we beg to oppose.
Ending the debate on side opposition, we call the reply speaker.
Thank you. We've heard some very interesting cases from both sides of the House today. But at the end of the day, we feel as though the debate has really become summed up within two issues, that of practicality of implementation and effects on education. And in my reply speech today, I'm going to show you through these two main themes how we've come out on the top of both of these main issues. So first, into practicality of implementation. What they told you under this was mostly their model. They told you that they wouldn't have any exceptions, and they told you that they'd be putting in taxes. What we told you in our first speech on side opposition today was that we think that people are going to have to defer to other opportunities, to other choices, such as homeschooling. This isn't something that we had a response from on side opposition. We told you that people in public school would now need to pay taxes. People who are considered less wealthy by side proposition are now going to pay more taxes. We told you that this isn't going to eliminate wealth discrepancies in society, and we don't think that they've done an adequate job in proving to you today that this is something that's really going to benefit all of society. We told you that their model never actually had any element of reallocation. They told you that this money is now going to benefit the people going to public school. But because that wasn't involved in their model, we can't actually promise that this is going to happen. We told you that just because the government's getting more money under this basis, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get more in education. And we also told you down the bench today that because they didn't define this House as liberal democracies, they shouldn't have focused their case so much on developed countries. They shouldn't have focused their case so much in places where we already have an educational infrastructure. We asked you what's going to happen in countries where people don't have the money to pay the government. We asked you what's going to happen in countries where even if the government has the money, it's not going to prioritize education. And this also isn't something that we heard an adequate response from on side proposition today. Under this idea of practicality of implementation, we also gave you a two-tiered argument. That of benefits of the two-tiered system and how adaptability is the best within the system. They told you that they don't think that we should have as many places to adapt as possible because they think that that'll just give us more bad views. We told you that this was an assertion, that private schools can teach democratic views, that private schools can teach these things, but like we also told you, because they weren't even put in democratic places, we don't think that's necessarily what they need to be teaching, we don't see why having multiple views that aren't tied to the government are bad. So now I'd like to get into my second theme, that of effects on education. And we also talked about this within our point of the two-tiered system. We talked to you about strain on the public system. When more people need to go into the public system, they're not going to have the resources. And this was only refuted from side opposition or proposition today by telling you that they will have the resources now because we're taxing people. But I think I already dealt with that in my practicality theme. We don't understand why this allocation is suddenly going to help the huge strain on the public sector. Then we also brought to you the idea of choice. We talked to you about why we have this freedom of choice, and they haven't justified why the government can take that away. They haven't established a need for this bill. They haven't told us what harms private education is having on the students. They haven't told us what harms the government, what harms these people are putting onto society. We told you that parents can decide best for their children. We told you that parents understand the individuality of their kids. This is also something that we didn't hear a response from. We didn't hear why the government should have the right to impose on the family in this situation. Then finally, we talked to you about government regulation, and we told you that we think that it's bad when the government can control exactly what their kids are hearing in school. And I told you why that's going to happen. We told you that strain, when we have this, is going to be the strain that this causes is going to lower the education because we're going to be eliminating the high education of private education, but it's also going to be putting such strain on the public system that we're going to be lowering education overall. So because we brought to you these points today, because we've come out on top, we beg to propose. Thank you.
And to end the debate, we call the reply speaker of Team Government.
Something very interesting happened in the beginning of this debate. We came here and we said that we would like equal opportunities for everybody. They have never responded to that argument, and we think by that they concede that equality is some kind of value that we would like to have in our society. We think that the program of schooling that they propose goes against that, and we think that we win this debate on this alone. So what have we debated? We think that this debate has been really messy, and we have debated things apart because they didn't try to engage with our principles that we gave you. We think that they just tried to find certain holes in our model, but we think that it is not about models, but the values that we are trying to encourage. We gave you a lot of examples in this debate. Unfortunately, you didn't provide them. We think that examples of the opposition are like dinosaurs. They just don't exist. So what am I going to look in my reply speech? I'm firstly going to look what is better, with there, and then mutual exclusivity, and then look at some arguments that were never rebutted from our side. So firstly about this entire healthcare thing that comes only late in the third speech. We think that the fact that you say that there are two countries with two-tier system in the world doesn't say anything. Because we think that is exactly what have you been doing through the entire debate. Empty rhetorics. We say that we ask you the logic, why the two-tier system cannot work. And this is what we have provided you on our side. We said that once we put more money, only by putting more money in public schools, means that there is also going to be more money, that also parents are going to put more money in private schools. So we say that we can never change the difference between the two-tier system. We say that we are just putting more money for useless things, and we say we are not bringing equality that we want. We say that teachers are, until you're not going to have two systems made in one, the teachers are always going to be in private school. That means that normal people are never going to have access to good schooling, and this is bad. Then you have very weird examples like those with Stalin, and we think this is just funny. But what we think was the biggest problem of this opposition is that they didn't engage with all the principles that we have told you. We told you about equality, but you said that equality is we're just not going to care about it. And we also told you about unity. Once again, you said that these people are simply its scholarships are enough. But we said that with scholarship you're not solving anything, because we say that scholarship help 5% of poor people. We say that we have to make a big change, and the change we make is a good one. And then, well, what were the actual arguments? They talk about like better choice, but we say that we are talking about choice only about like 5% of the parents. But we also said that like we think that the state has really good, can make a really good decisions. We say that like state can say everybody has to go to school, and here we say that like we said that like state is the one that can provide better education. So why did we win this debate? We think that we try to provide you a kind of a model that would take in consideration entire society. We are not going to look at those who have most money, but we are going to look at everybody. We said that like because of historic redistribution of money, this is not possible until we get rid of two-tier system. You're trying to make this continuity, and the only thing you say is because it makes better education. But we say we proved that education is not going to be better. We proved that we are going to get much more talent. We are proved that it's going to influence the economy in a great way. We think that we have won this debate because we proved that our principle stands and yours doesn't. We are incredibly proud to propose this motion.
Thank you very much. To ask you to shake hands. And if everyone please give us some minutes of silence so we can work out what's the debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, contrary to popular belief, judges are not soulless creatures that gain pleasure from telling people that they lost. Actually, we gain pleasure from the entertainment that is provided to us by the teams in front of us. And ladies and gentlemen, we have to say that we've gained a lot of pleasure today in this round. Sadly, we're disappointed. It was a very close debate. Most judges gave it to a 0.5 to a 1.5 margin. Sadly, though, all judges gave it the same way. That means it's a 5-0. We were all very sad, all expecting that it would be a split. Now let me tell you what happened in this debate. We were not very pleased, that we thought this was a very messy debate. Indeed, ideas were going on back and forth like tennis balls in a very, very violent and aggressive intellectual tennis match. We were happy about that. We were not happy that these ideas that were brilliant in some aspects were most of the times underanalyzed or superficially clashed. At the end of the debate, we believed that the model was fairly vague, and the attacks on the model were fairly vague as well. We had to ask ourselves, who provides the best education for society? Is it a one-way public system, or is it a two-tier system? Framing, analysis, and clarity all mattered. It was very close. And, as I said, with a 5-0 decision, but a very, very close margin, we gave it to Team Canada. Now, both teams are expected to get individual feedback if you desire. We're not forcing you or anything. From the judges. It's us beautiful people right here. Okay? Cool. Free.